I'm just going to ask a couple of starting questions to our panelists, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from all of you. So start thinking of what you'd like to learn from them and their environment. So the first question that I have is, we talk a lot about uniting the data nation. And sometimes it may be a little bit abstract, like, oh, data needs to come together, or I have different forms of data, semi-structured and structured, or I need to bring people together, or I need to bring applications together. So can you help land for us, what does data nation mean, or uniting the data nation means in your company, in your team, in your reality? What are the problems and challenges that you're faced with, which at the same time they become opportunities? If you want to start, Julia.
Hi, everybody. So in our case, we've always tried to allow all of our analysts and business users and data scientists and engineers have access to data, and running an on-prem solution was always very hard. We've heard people talk about constraints on parallel queries or being able to access data, running ETLs, loading data, and having people running their reports at the same time. It doesn't really scale. So for us, uniting the data and moving to the cloud is allowing all of these different groups of users access the data while we're trying to load and clean and process and surface the data. And because our users, some of them are more technical, some of them are less technical, some of them try to run machine learning models, and some of them are just trying to run very simple queries. So having that different level of technical ability, giving them the equal opportunity to see what they need to see is very important. So uniting them in that one space is we're very excited about.
George.
Yeah, our story is really around uniting our data sources. So I've got an architecture background, and so my focus really, and Docusign's focus in terms of bringing the data nation together is bringing together the data sources that we use to run our business. And what we saw probably about 18 months ago was that we had scale issues in terms of running our systems on what I guess would be best characterized as a do-everything database. That we had similar skills and background from what's running our software service. And so the inability of that system to handle the workloads and the growing data sets that we wanted to put into it was really impeding our ability to grow. And so we, doing the evaluation and doing the migration to Snowflake is really a big component in terms of being able to serve all the analysts, all the data science needs, reporting needs that we have in the enterprise.
Yeah, Snowflake has definitely had a unifying effect in our organization. It's performant enough. We can load all of our data in there. We have a very high volume event stream from programmatic real-time bidding advertising. And we also ingest or replicate our MySQL application backend metadata stores into Snowflake. And so every part of our company is in the Snowflake database. Now, one risk you face when doing that is losing control of visibility, who's using what and why. If you need to refactor something, it can be challenging to understand who's using what. So we like Snowflake, it's good old familiar SQL constructs. We use roles, views, schemas, privileges to kind of have a nod towards data governance. Each one of our teams has their own schema, their own little chunk of the Snowflake database. They can expose those columns and tables they think are relevant and useful. We can consume them. So we have a very collaborative, distributed, open, transparent system across the whole company that minimizes the amount of DBA work I have to do on our team. We give each team enough power to control their own domain.
Great. So I'll tell you, as someone that builds products and builds technology, one of the most exciting things is to hear about use cases and scenarios that are now enabled or now easier that may not have been or were not in the past. And we were just talking before the panel, at least with Julia and George, and to me it's super exciting to hear the story that like, oh yeah, we're early on in our Snowflake journey, but we already enabled this and that use case. Can you share a little bit about what's possible now in terms of new use cases, new value to your users?
One of the things that we're actually the most excited about right now versus probably, once we get used to it, probably move on to the next thing, but data sharing. So we're still migrating most of our operational and load onto Snowflake. However, our marketing team has partnered with Fivetran as a data integrator, so we're able to load Salesforce data, Optimizely data. I don't even know what they're loading, to be honest. Like, I'm in IT and I don't know, which is awesome. They're clicking a button and it just magically appears in Snowflake. It apparently runs every hour. So having that cloud integration into Snowflake going almost real time or as often as we want it to be using somebody else's software is amazing. And then we were also able to use data sharing within Snowflake, which was even more exciting. So we historically have contracted with multiple data providers for really large data sets that would take our engineering team sometimes months to figure out how to stage, how to load it in or export it out, post it on SFTP, load it from SFTP, clean the data. If anything broke, they would have to get back into their pipeline. It would take, sometimes it would literally take months for us to get a new data feed from some of these partners. We've been talking to them to see if we could try data sharing in Snowflake, and that kind of worked like magic. All of a sudden, this table appears. We can see
like magic.
Select from it. It really did feel like magic. So again, the marketing team has been able to talk to these partners directly to kind of define what the data would look like. And now we were able to increase how often we see this data in our schema. So one of the data providers that we use for our direct mail campaigns, millions of rows of data every week. It used to be once a quarter, and we don't even know that it's being refreshed. So now to us, it's just there. So for us, that specific use cases has been amazing.
Awesome, awesome. George, new use cases. What's possible now that was not before, or how has it changed your environment?
I don't want to copy Julie's answer because we have similar experience in terms of using one of the data pipeline technologies to be able to really, with the input of maybe 3 or 4 fields, being able to bring in an external application with minimal data integration. A couple people today talked about 80% of the work being data integration, and when you can really distill that down to what's the connection information, what's the system that I need to get to, and these data pipeline services have the ability to understand the APIs and what data is available, and really just making that a 5-minute setup. It is really amazing. That's very exciting. So it's really the same answer, unfortunately.
Can't get tired of hearing the same answer.
Yeah.
So the question is, what can we do now that we couldn't used to do, now that we have Snowflake? Simple, analyze our data and understand it. We have a lot of complicated JSON, huge quantity of JSON, very complicated data structures. Before we had Snowflake, the tools we used to analyze that were clunky and cumbersome. They were not SQL-based. One had to ingest data from S3. That took a while. One had to be a programmer writing Scala code to parse out the JSON. It took literally a whole afternoon to do a simple analysis that can now be done literally in 5 minutes with a simple SQL statement. So using Snowflake allowed us to really increase the visibility of data, the usability of data, made it possible for every analyst to look at the data and see the data. And yet, because of the full-featured JSON parsing capabilities of Snowflake, we still have raw JSON available, and it's parsed out. And so you can have your cake and eat it too, and it's very fast and easy. And good old familiar SQL is why I like Snowflake.
That's great to hear. OK, so I want to open it to questions from any of you. I think Ross has a microphone, and if you raise your hand, he'll find you.
So I think I would like to reverse Christian's question, which is, if there is one thing you would add Snowflake that is missing now, what would that be?
I would add a procedural language and materialized views, databasey kind of things.
I will say the integration of groups in identity providers So we've standardized on Okta as our identity provider, and we've no ability to do role provisioning based on those groups. So we'd like to be able to have that pass through so we can do our provisioning through that.
Julia.
I have one from each. We're trying to figure out OAuth right now, so that's definitely something that could be improved. And then materialized views is something that we're very excited about as well. Having a little bit of control over managing performance, but probably not taking it all the way to the extent that Oracle and Vertica did.
Well, what is the right extent for?
That's for you guys to figure out.
Yeah. I think you saw it in Bob's slide. Aspirationally, we want to take that load from you.
Yeah.
I understand that it might not always work the way you want it, so at some point we may give you some control, but aspirationally, that's what we want. Other than that, I think everything that you mentioned is being worked on.
Yeah, very exciting.
Any other question from any of you?
So I work for a small startup, and data just keeps growing literally every day. At which point would you say it's a good moment to start integrating with Snowflake?
I think as soon as you can. It's not always, it's not just the size of the database that matters. I think it's the fact that it supports different data types. It supports different integrations. You can load your data and analyze your data at the same time. The fact that it separates compute from storage. So it doesn't mean that you have to have a lot of data, a lot of users using the data. It's that it provides us additional functionality, and it's really easy. When we started our proof of concept, we kind of on purpose said, don't tell us anything about the database. We just want to try to play with it, and being able to log in and start writing SQL and see the performance right away without having a lot of training was really awesome. So I think it's really more for how little management do you want to do of your database is what I think should matter, because everything else you need to manage.
Either of you want to add something to what Julia said?
Yeah, I think a key indicator of when you should start using Snowflake is if you have a bunch of JSON and S3. If you've got JSON and S3, use Snowflake. I would also advise that it is a database. Start using Snowflake when you have somebody who has a little bit of the old school familiar database technologies. You don't need to be a database person to use Snowflake, but if you do, then you're going to be able to build up an enterprise class system much easier.
I might summarize to say, if you have SQL literacy and you're tired of looking at the hourglass or having timeouts, that would be my suggestion. It's time.
And I don't know the rules if I get to participate and give answers, but what I would say is, if you have data and you want to get insights of your data, Snowflake is a very, very good answer. It'll scale from a very small amount of data and only charge for what you consume, all the way to very large amounts of data, structured or semi-structured. So obviously I am colored or biased, but I would say now is a good time.
I'm interested in what kind of database technologies you guys were using before you switched to Snowflake.
Oh, good question.
I used Vertica for 6 years prior to Snowflake. And moving to Snowflake, I enjoyed the freedom of not having to design projections and segmentation. Snowflake, there's very little, if any, data structure engineering you do. And before that, I used Oracle for 20, 25 years, which made me into a database person.
So I have over a decade of Oracle experience, which is where all the gray hair actually came from. And about 5 years of Teradata experience, a little bit of SQL Server, Sybase as well. Sybase, yeah, I'm dating myself, I know.
At Square, we're using Vertica, so projections are a thing. And before that, I've used Redshift, which did not scale for us, but and then Oracle, a lot of it.
The question is, how much can you dispense with traditional data modeling? I'm biased. I'd say not at all. You need to do traditional database modeling if you're going to have a good analytic system. The Snowflake and the way it handles JSON and the variant data type frees you. You could just throw everything in there, and you can use it. But then your users are going to need to be experts in how to walk the JSON tree. They'll need to be experts of your data structures and how to flatten child objects. Whereas with good data modeling, you can expose the data structures to make them much more accessible to analysts. We use an entity relationship diagram. We have primary and foreign keys. You can easily know what data joins to what. That's all old school data modeling, which is, I think, still just as essential in today's day and age as it ever was.
I would also add that if data security is a concern, that's something that plays into that as well. Because you can throw anything into an open store, and if everybody can see everything, maybe that's okay. But most companies these days, not everything is shareable public. So adding that security layer on top and having more traditional data model helps a lot, and the views.
Yep.
Good views.
George?
And I'd also add that the standard relational layer is usually what's needed when you're integrating with tools like BI tools, like Tableau we talked about earlier. So at some point where you need to essentially set those structures there so that those tools can use it, at that point you want to go from the semi-structured to structured.
Yeah, and at Sharethrough, we've got a couple petabytes, and it has referential integrity. I've got primary keys and foreign keys. Now, Snowflake allows you to declare them, but it doesn't enforce them. We check those daily and nightly, and that way we can be sure that you can join table A to table B, and that's essential for our analysis, and you can only do that with some sense of data modeling.
I have a different type of questions. My company is about 600 employees, about 500 of them are engineers. They are much smarter than the IT people and capable. So we just completed the POC. So we are trying to open out to our employee, right? So how do you control? So every query, every process costs money on Snowflake. So how do you control that? During the POC, we already have one employee running the query with the biggest EC variable running on all our credit that Snowflake can give it to us. So I was wondering, how do you control the cost on the Snowflake side? Thank you.
Yeah, but basically, company 600 people, 500 technical employees, POC, it's a controlled environment. What happens now if you open it to the entire company and they all start to consume lots of Snowflake credits and your bill goes up? That's sort of the question. And then how do you govern it? I would say it sounds good to me, but let's hear from
there's some administrative things you can do through the tool that allow you to limit how much it can scale. So you can start it up at small instead of large, and only allow it to double or triple instead of going 10x. There's also some alerts you can set up that say, hey, you're close to whatever limit for this particular warehouse that if you don't want to go over, then you can basically shut it down. But the interesting thing about it, to flip that around for us, because we're running on Vertica, we have some queries that are runaway queries on Vertica that take down the Vertica cluster. So that means nobody else can do anything else at all. And so the way that you assign cost or how you think about it is a little bit different. So for us, being able to say, hey, you're doing something crazy, but you're doing it in your warehouse, so nobody in your team is going to be able to do anything, but the rest of the company is fine, is worth a lot more. So we kind of think about it a little bit differently too.
Yeah, Snowflake gives me capabilities for managing costs that I simply didn't have available in other databases. For instance, having different warehouses tuned to the different workloads. That my ETL warehouse is just bursting at its seams. I'm using the minimal cost I can get to get my data processed in a day. It's loaded, and it would be horrible for interactive use. So for my analysts, I have another warehouse on the side that's not at all impacted. And there's different ways of controlling the warehouse resources, consumption, and auto-scaling that allows you to tune each warehouse for that particular need and to manage the costs in ways that other databases that I've used couldn't even touch.
George, anything you want to add? Okay.
That's pretty comprehensive.
I think the capability that Bob and others have shared here in the panel on multiple warehouses accessing the same data is incredibly powerful.
I have a two-part question. Part one, how many years is your company moved to Snowflakes? And the second part, after moving to Snowflakes, did you completely remove the old architect?
Great question. So how long since you started adopting Snowflake, and have you removed the previous solution?
Yeah, we're a fairly early adopter. We've been doing Snowflake for a couple of years now, and it's accelerating. And yeah, we're shutting down legacy systems left and right.
We've been a customer for about a year. We have not shut down all of the work from the legacy system. What we found is that there was different priorities essentially over that year. And ironically, we've spun up new areas that were never in production on the old ones. So it's a question of how you want to, how do you make that comparison?
Similar to Docusign, we're still in the process of migrating, but what we've been doing is doing a lot of new use cases on Snowflake that we couldn't even do on the existing system. The plan is to shut down the existing system in 3 months, so we'll see.
So can you talk about your query per second requirements and how much compute power you're throwing at that?
You said query per second or query performance?
Per second, like how many queries are you running per second?
Concurrency.
I don't know if we've measured it per second necessarily. We have a lot of load. Some of it is a little bit harder to do on the existing systems, to be honest. We do have a lot of load. We have about 1,600 SQL users in the company. And most of them are hitting our databases fairly hard. But yeah, I don't know if I have like specific stats off the top of my head, to be honest.
Any of you have numbers on concurrency that you're achieving?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. By default, Snowflake has a concurrency limit of about 8 sessions, queries in one warehouse, which strikes you as very low. Of course, translated into queries per second depends upon how quick those queries are. It's kind of a capacity planning terms, kind of a Little's law relationship there. Although I don't know what our exact queries per second is, we do get responsive use from our applications doing lightweight queries through a simple little bit of warehouse tuning. It's possible to get decent performance. Now, obviously, we run real-time bidding. We're not using Snowflake to make our bidding decisions. It can't handle that level of performance. But for your typical analytic use with many, many people, it's pretty easy to tune to get a system that's not queuing too much and is responsive.
Any final words?
No, that's not a metric that I track, so I wouldn't care to propose a number.
Okay, at this point I would say please join me in thanking our panelists for being here with us. And I'm sure you can find them on our way out or later to get more insights and questions on their experience. Thank you again.